Hi sweethearts, my plan is to ramble as usual, and today I think I would like to ramble about self-love because I was doing a reading recently for a client who acknowledges that she has an intellectual grasp of the concept of self-love, and she's just about putting it into practice, and this is where it's getting complicated. And I realise, this is the problem for a great many people. And for anyone who ever tells you or ever professes to believe that self-love is unnecessary, or that it's self-involved, or that it's just an affectation, those people are probably the people who have never tried to kill themselves, never cut themselves, never starved themselves, never stayed in an unhappy relationship or an abusive relationship for years because they didn't think they were worth anything more. People who don't appreciate the innate value of self-love are the people who have been fortunate enough not to go through some of the problems that those of us who do practice daily self-love have been through. Because self-love is integral to the plot of your personal evolution. I believe it's integral to the plot of you living a good life. I really think that it is so important, and for a lot of people I think it's the missing link. And until they really get a handle on it, and they get a handle on taking it from intellectual comprehension to actual daily practice, which I think is the most difficult thing for so many people, I really believe that link, that void will always be there. There'll always be this self-love shaped hole within. So that's why I teach it, and that's why I value it, and that's why I practice it myself, and I really believe that it saved my life. And one thing that I can tell you about self-love is that it comes much easier for people who have come to that point in their lives where the status quo has become untenable. When you look at what your life is going to be like in 2 years or 5 years' time, if you don't start implementing a practice of self-love, if you don't start valuing yourself, thinking about where your life is going to be down the line if you stay on this railroad of self-denial, self-loathing, berating yourself, criticising yourself, mocking yourself, telling yourself you'll never amount to anything. When you look at that future life, what does it look like? How does it feel? Does it feel good to think that you might be there, that you might still be going through the same limiting beliefs, using the same bad habits, experiencing the same addictions, or experiencing the same misery because you didn't bother to get a handle on self-love? That's one thing that I think brings a lot of people to it and makes a lot of people realise its inherent worth, is thinking about what is going to happen if you don't. What is going to happen for real if you don't get a handle on how important self-love is, if you don't get a handle on how important self-care is to your personal journey. And I think that when the status quo becomes untenable is when many people who always denied themselves self-love suddenly start trying to put it into practice. And this is where that issue comes, where you understand self-love, you suddenly understand why it is that people bang on about it, and you suddenly understand how integral it could be to your story, but you're not sure how to start it. You're not sure how to actually live it. And the thing that I really want to tell you guys is that self-love doesn't come on like a light switch. I think a lot of the messages that we hear about self-love in the self-development community and, certain parts of the New Age community are kind of a little bit deceptive, or maybe a little bit oversimplified, in the same way that a lot of messages about forgiveness are oversimplified. These things don't come on like a light switch. They don't just immediately fall into place. Self-love is a daily practice, and you should never berate yourself or feel like you failed yourself because you don't get there in a few weeks or a few months. I think that, it's important to understand that self-love starts small. You have to set yourself these small challenges to actually change your neural pathways and think of yourself and your life and your relationship to yourself in a different way. So that's the first thing to note, that you shouldn't expect yourself to be able to switch it on. And it's not a case of, one day you don't have self-love and the next day you do, and it's suddenly like a eureka moment. It is a discipline. It's a discipline. It's a daily practice, and you keep going with it. And I made a video quite some time ago called Old Lessons, Old Wounds, or something like that, where I talked about how the healing process, the journey of healing, is very much like that. You fall off the wagon, you get back on. And it kind of goes along like that from day to day. So you've got to be there for yourself. You've got to show up for yourself. And the important thing about self-love too is that Where you start with self-love is really with intuition. It's really with your inner voice. So when you feel like you're on the outside of self-love and you're not really quite sure how to open that door, and it's kind of a little bit confusing, and you're thinking, okay, I understand the value of it, but how do I actually do it? When you think like that, you're using your rational mind, you're using your pragmatism, you're using your logic, and you're thinking of it like a paradigm that you need to slip into, or something of that nature. But really, what self-love requires is for you to strip all of those layers of logic and pragmatism back. And actually what you need to do is you need to sit with your intuitive mind, with your deepest possible insights. And the reason that you need to do that is really twofold. First of all, when you listen to your intuition, you find that you actually know so many of the answers. You know how to implement self-love. You know what it really should feel like. And when you listen to your intuitive insights, when you push away like outside expectation, your own expectation, the frustration of not being able to feel self-love, you know, the frustration of seeing other people talk about it and feeling like you can't actually get into that paradigm. When you pull all of that ego stuff aside and sit with your intuitive mind, the higher mind, the deepest insights from self, you'll realise that you actually know what your pathway towards self-love should look like, but you just didn't realise it because you weren't listening to that part of yourself. You were listening to logic and rationality and expectation and pressure and ego and how do I do it? It's like a course of study and I need to know the correct way. When you listen to your intuitive mind, you'll realise that there is no correct way. There's a way for you. There's a way that sits right with you and that resonates with you. And the longer you spend in silence, stillness and solitude, I can't use those three words enough, silence, stillness, solitude. I use them with my clients all the time. The more you sit in that state of being, the more you can listen to your intuitive mind. Okay, the sound comes up, it rises like a bell, it starts really, really far away and then it comes up to the surface. And it has some incredible insights for you. You know, you really need to tune in with it and listen to it. And the other reason that it's so important to listen to your intuitive insights when you are trying to bring self-love into your life is because self-love, at the absolute crux of it, what it actually is at foundation level, is it's honouring your relationship with yourself. And in order to do that, you've got to be listening. You've got to be listening to your deeper needs, your deeper desires, your deeper concerns, your fears, your insecurities. And a lot of the stuff that gets in the way of that is this outside expectation, or this, you know, this idea that if you foster self-love, you could be running a really successful six-figure business in a year's time. That's not what you're doing it for, and that shouldn't be your ultimate aim. Self-love is the object in and of itself. It's to sit with yourself and listen to yourself. And a lot of people fear self-love because they actually fear being alone. They fear feeling as though they're acting in isolation. One thing that comes along with a lack of self-love is constantly trying to seek love from others, or validation and approval from others, confirmation from others. Projecting your idea of what a perfect relationship should be like onto somebody else, and then reserving the right to get very angry if they fail in your expectation. All of this kind of stuff normally comes from a lack of self-love. If you have self-love, then you can enjoy your own validation. You can listen to your own opinion. You can tune in with your gut instinct. You don't need to go with what somebody else is saying or doing. You can appreciate outside guidance and outside involvement, but you don't need it. You're strong in your core. And you know that your opinion is what's really important, and whether or not you think your journey is going in the correct direction, that's what matters. And you only really get to that stage and achieve that state of being through silence, stillness, solitude, listening to yourself, tuning in. And it's not going to happen immediately. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes a really, really long time to implement a practice which is actually meaningful and constantly expanding. When I first started listening to myself, really listening to myself, trying to understand what my needs were and why I kept going back to these negative cycles, it was actually very odd. It was a really odd experience for me, and there was quite a lot of humour to it in a way. Because when you first try and step into self-love, which is really another way of stepping into your power, it's the cornerstone of your personal power. It's everything that it is. You're devoid of personal power if you don't have self-love. You've already surrendered it. That's my sincere belief. Because any way that you're using your power, you're only using it for some kind of gain that doesn't come from within. You're only trying to seek from without or obtain from without because you have this void within. And when I first started on my journey towards self-love, it was really just about sitting down, no distractions, no friends round, just basically sitting alone on my bed, and the cuts were still healing on my arms, okay? I still had like fresh wounds on my arms. I had a very long relationship with a 10-pack of Wilkinson sword. And I still was, you know, had these fresh wounds, and I was sitting on my bed and I was just talking to myself. I was saying to myself, look, what do you want out of life? What are you scared of? Why are you afraid to release this habit? What is it that it does for you? You know, what is it that you would do instead if you didn't do this? Is this really the healthiest way to carry on with your life? And it was really a case of just asking myself questions and then answering them. And this is a good way to bring your intuition up to the surface. Because rather than listening to your internal monologue, which, you know, if you're devoid of self-love, is normally full of limiting beliefs and negative cycles and you convincing yourself that you're not worthy, concerns about what everybody's thinking, you know, your internal monologue is extremely powerful. And if it's chock full of shit, you're not going to get anywhere. So what you need to do really is you need to control what's going on with your thought process by asking yourself questions and then allowing your intuitive mind to answer them. And one thing that you might want to try, if this seems particularly difficult to you or abstract to you, is writing your intuitive responses down. This is something that people often do when they're getting in touch with deity in their spiritual practice or divinity. They ask deity questions or kind of throw out keywords into the universe, and then they kind of channel whatever it is that comes through to them as a response, and they put it onto paper. In Megan Watterson's book, Reveal, A Sacred Manual for Getting Spiritually Naked, she talks about how she's kept a book for years where she does this. She talks to source, she asks divinity questions, and then she writes down the responses. I think this is a great way to go with your intuitive mind too. Sit down, adopt the big three: silence, stillness, solitude. Relish that. I know it feels awkward at first, I know it feels strange at first and silly, and maybe you want to call somebody and maybe you'd far rather have a dialogue than a monologue, but try to relish it, because it's a luxury, it's a privilege, it's a right, it's your birthright to have a connection with yourself, to understand what you want and what you need and how you can push through and how you can evolve. And when you get to a stage where you feel it's appropriately quiet and the distractions are appropriately kind of moved to the sides, start asking yourself sincere questions and talk to yourself. Have a conversation with yourself. This is about you getting down with yourself. Try and think about every single like major conversation that you've had with someone that you love in your life, when they've been going through problems and you've been giving them guidance, or when the two of you have had difficulties in your communication and you're trying to actually understand each other and come to an understanding with each other. Think about those kinds of conversations that you've had in your life. You're now looking to implement that with you. You and you are going to have a chat, okay? So really what you're doing there is you are honouring the fact that your relationship with yourself is very important, and your relationship with yourself is in a really bad way. So it needs to take precedence. It needs to be the priority. And that's where you begin. That's where you begin. It's as simple as saying, right, today, no phone, no friends, I'm not going to go and have lunch with those people, or I'm not going to study this, you know, I'm going to have a day which is just about me communicating with me. I'm going to get to the bottom of something. And it's incredible how loving that actually is for the soul, how much love it gives to the spirit. It might not feel like that at first, but over time you realise that even just by listening to yourself, really, your intuitive insights, your deeper instincts, what you know is really at the core of something, you are implementing self-love by doing that, because you are not ignoring yourself, you are not denying yourself the opportunity to speak, to feel, to want something more, and to try and plan how to get there. So that in itself is an act of self-love, and the more that you foster that, the more that you nurture that, the more that you schedule that time in without apology, because you need to, the more it will actually come into fruition. And I think, you know, that's really what I wanted to say about, you know, that problem that a lot of people have, where they kind of see self-love from the outside looking in, but it's like there's a glass wall between that concept and them. They understand how it could benefit them, but they're really not sure how to get through. And personal power, which is in my mind, personal power is the ability to say no, the ability to stand your ground, the ability to understand your limitations, the ability to seek validation from within rather than from without. All of these things that personal power kind of amalgamates together under one handy little kind of tagline or title, they all come from self-love. You know, without actually loving yourself, valuing yourself, you can't do those things. You will be walked over, or you will be manipulated, or you will feel unsure and scared and not able to grasp the future, not even able to grasp the present moment. So self-love is vital. Don't let anybody tell you any different. Self-love is vital to the process of individuation. It's vital to the process of personal evolution. It is so important, because so many other things that you need to do to get your life on track and be where you feel you want to be stem from self-love. If you have a deficit of that, then how are you going to know where your limitations are, let alone implement them? How are you going to be able to act decisively if somebody breaches your boundary? How are you going to be able to believe that you're entitled to the life you want and actually make steps to build the strong foundations for the life you want? You're not going to, because you're constantly convincing yourself that you're not worthy of it or that it doesn't matter. And so self-love is a discipline that is absolutely vital, and the more people actually try to make that connection between the intellectual understanding of it and the actual daily practice of it, the more I see their courage, I see their bravery, and I absolutely salute that. I worship that in other people, because it is hard and it took me a very, very long time to do it. And so I guess I just wanted to put that out there. That is a thought for some people, I suppose, about self-love, and keep going with your journey towards it. It is a struggle, you know, it's not always plain sailing. And a meditation teacher once told me that every single time you meditate, every single time you go into the meditative state, she said, you meet yourself within. And sometimes you meet yourself and it feels good, it feels harmonious, it feels like you've just clicked into place with the meditative state, and you know that it's like a jigsaw, two pieces of a jigsaw, it fits together nicely, and you're you know, you're on that state of being that you want to be on. But sometimes, she said, you meet yourself inside and it's kind of awkward. You know, you go within and it kind of feels a little bit odd or a little bit unsettling, or you wonder if something's out of sync, or, you know, you don't quite feel all your chakras spinning correctly, whatever you want to call it. And I think the same is very true of this time that you schedule for yourself, where you actually seek to maintain a relationship with yourself, listen to yourself, not anybody else, yourself. And when you schedule this time and you really seek to be alone, in your own company, in solitude, it's got nothing to do with loneliness. The more you love yourself, the more you'll realise that, you know, spending time with you is very important. And the less self-love you have, the more lonely you'll feel when you're in solitude. But in fact, solitude is a tool. It is a vital tool on the road to self-love. You must get down with it. And when you schedule in this time to be in solitude and silence and stillness and listen to yourself and tune in and really get one with your intuitive insights and figure things out, sometimes it is going to be plain sailing. Sometimes it is going to feel great. You're going to have a great session, I suppose you could call it, and you're going to get something really illuminating and revitalizing out of it. Other times it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be difficult. It's going to feel weird and unsettling, and you're not going to quite know what's going on there, and it's going to be kind of irritating for you. But stick with it, you know, because you will have those days. You definitely will. I definitely did. Everybody who's been working towards the process of really bringing self-love into their lives as a practice has had those problems, those problem days. And that's why we as a community in self-development and in healing and in personal growth, we need to be there for each other, to support each other through that, because it's very easy to give up at the first hurdle, but that won't get you anywhere. So I'm telling you now, you know, you will have those days where you feel like throwing in the towel. You will have those days where it's almost trippy. It's almost like you sit there and you think, why the hell am I doing this? I don't even understand what I'm doing. This is crazy. But keep going with it, because you do have those breakthroughs, those incredible insights, and they are just beautiful. They are so nurturing for the soul, and you will get there. You know, I think if I can get there, you can get there. I think anybody can get there. And also, just for a little bit of extra advice, keep calm and drink tea is, you know, important on any journey of self-love. Thank you for listening, guys. Love to you all, and keep going on your journey. I believe in you, and I mean that sincerely. Much love.